The topic of this panel is making the connection between STEM industry and the classroom. There's a broad consensus that enhancing the connections between STEM industries and the K through 12 world can have very positive results. Teachers can develop curriculum resources and tools that are more relevant and exciting for their students. Students can get a better understanding of real-world STEM applications and a better appreciation of the career opportunities in these fields. Companies can create pipelines of well-trained individuals in their communities who are potential future employees. Now, there are many different forms for these corporate classroom partnerships that have met with great success, and we're fortunate to have a lot of these here in North Carolina. K through 12 teachers, mentored by industry and academic scientists during intensive internships, can develop outstanding teaching tools for STEM topics. And examples of this include the Kenan Fellows Program for Curriculum and Leadership Development here at NC State University, the STEM immersion programs in Charlotte. Students that do internships in industry can benefit from real job experiences as well as the exposure they get to whole new areas of STEM applications. And examples of this include the North Carolina Triangle Apprenticeship Program, Apprenticeship 2000, the North Carolina Space Grant Lord Corporation Summer Internship Program. And industry can hold career days and technology demonstrations for students and teachers to improve their understanding and appreciation of STEM applications and careers. And a good example is what our friends at McKim and Creed and their geomatic professionals do in sharing their insights with students during career days at West Brunswick High School. We have with us in our panel 3 individuals to discuss this topic and to share their perspectives and experiences. And what I want you to know about them and what I've learned about them in the course of just getting prepared for this session was how deeply personal this topic is for them and how they share in their commitment to the work that we're doing collectively. So Mark Townley is an AP Environmental Science and Earth Science teacher at Holly Springs High School. And as a Kenan Fellow, he worked closely with Dr. Heike Sederoff at NC State University to develop curriculum focused on biofuels production. A corporate leader who's very involved with schools in his community is Tim Baldwin. He's the Senior Vice President of McKim and Creed. And a government representative vitally interested in promoting training and apprenticeship programs is Kathryn Castelloes. She's the Bureau Chief for Apprenticeship and Training for the North Carolina Department of Commerce. So let's get started. Thank you all for being with us today. I'm going to start off, Mark, with a question for you. Please tell us a little bit about your experience as a Kenan Fellow working with scientists here at NC State University. How did this experience affect you as a teacher, and how did it help you improve your students' understanding of STEM fields?
Well, first, thank you for allowing me to be here today. My students gave me permission to be here today, so I thank them as well as my principal. The opportunity to become a Kenan Fellow allowed me the opportunity to fulfill several needs at my school, but on top of that, it provided me with lab training in a world-class lab. Dr. Sederoff's staff is absolutely amazing. It provided me with relevant and applicable professional development, and it also provided me with a highly qualified network of teachers with which I could collaborate, and they're from across the state. Now, our keynote speaker mentioned the disconnect between 3rd and 12th grade earlier today, and one of the things I wanted to mention connected to my fellowship, in my experience, I find that students in high school, teachers and students, they find themselves on these science islands. They find themselves taking a biology class, a chemistry class, a physics class. And I think that one of the places that we lose these students is that we do not provide them the opportunity to see what many people in this room already know, and that is you cannot be a professional scientist without incorporating all of those fields of science together. And I think that's one of the major mistakes that we make, is that we terrify teachers into making sure that those standards are covered really well, but we do not allow the room, the freedom for those teachers to interact often. So what I did, I wrote 4 lesson plans with my Kenan Fellow, with my fellowship. And the lesson plans were, first of all, designed to fulfill a need in my class. It fit between the biosphere and alternative energies that I was trying to teach my students. But it also allowed me to utilize the relevance of biofuels to provide a vertical alignment for our students from the major core courses from earth science all the way to a college-level course with my AP environmental class. So my students, they're earth science, they learn about fossil fuels, they're learning about why are we looking at alternative energies, and they're growing an oilseed plant, and they're learning about that aspect of biofuels. Then their sophomore year, they take biology, and they are applying their knowledge of cell function and cell parts and asking why is this algae making oil that they're growing, and what could we do with that oil? So they're building upon the prior knowledge from their freshman year. Our chemistry students are creating the molar solution medium that the biology students use to grow their algae in, and then my AP environmental students do a life cycle analysis of several fuels and determine through debate what is the best choice for North Carolina? What is the best fuel choice for our future here in North Carolina? Now, that vertical alignment allows me to dive so much deeper than I would have otherwise with just my earth science freshmen or just my AP environmental seniors, juniors in that case. And that's probably the most important thing that fellowship did for me.
Fantastic. Let's continue on this idea of alignment. Tim, tell us a little bit about what are the core values and needs that are driving your company's efforts in being active and engaged in the K-12 community. And what are the opportunities and challenges that you face in building these connections?
Okay, thank you. Again, I'd like to thank the organizers and their uncharacteristic and stunningly poor judgment in asking me to speak here, so that will become clearer as we go. You know, it's hard to answer that. I mean, we as people, you know, have this innate need and desire to give back to the community. That's part of our core values, and most everybody in the room, I think, or everybody in the room in terms of, you know, people helping people, in our case, define and achieve their goals and dreams and such. So while a lot of our interpretation of advancing STEM to a lot of our folks may sound like at best enlightened self-interest, I see it a little bit more as also frankly, a charitable venture. Now, you know, granted, we all are beneficiaries of that charity to some extent, but when you think about the enhancement of quality of life and strengthening of community and providing opportunities for children, it's really as much of a charity as all the other charitable ventures that we get into. And I think that's one of the opportunities is to recast this and package this and market this to our folks. I think someone mentioned about, you know, the gentleman in cubicle number 129. It's getting down to that individual level and helping them make the connection in the kind of good that this does for people. And we've done a lot at sort of a top-down level, being involved in, you know, Water for People and doing things that are more event-driven, like Math Counts or Water Week or Engineers Week. But yet I don't think we've done a good enough job at descending down to the grassroots level, to the local level. You know, I moved to Holly Springs 6 or 7 years ago. Until, you know, prepping for this, I'd never met Mark. I drive by the high school every day, and yet I haven't engaged with them we're doing all the kinds of things he just talked about in terms of this advanced environmental sustainability market, and yet, you know, we're going to get to know each other a lot better in the future now. But until then, we hadn't made that connection. So I think there's a huge challenge in how do we help bring this down to that individual level and help make those grassroots connections for our people, with our people.
Thank you. Kathryn, thinking about the individual level and the work that you all are doing to promote apprenticeship and training here, how do you go about successfully identifying, matching, and bridging the interests of students with the needs of the industry? And thinking about what Madhu Bariwal was talking about earlier this morning in terms of the skills and de-skilling, I think she actually said at one point, with some automation and functions and jobs. How do you ensure that in bridging the interests of students in industry that we're also continuously revitalizing their skill sets in light of the fact that we have a rapidly changing pace of technology in the way that we work?
Wow, that's a lot. Well, basically, we with apprenticeship work directly with the employer. So we're in constant communication and determining exactly what the employer is looking for. And we take that information and we go to the schools, whether it's the high school, community college, or even in the university level. And we work with them to determine, based on this need, and especially now with advanced manufacturing at the level that it is right now, where employers are looking for high-level skills in STEM, in math, and engineering. So we're going to the schools and working with them to determine, an applicant pool for these employers to look at, and taking those and going to the company and developing first a pre-apprenticeship. Giving that student the opportunity to really look into the real world, and this is what this job is really like. Is this really what I want to do with my career? And it also gives the employer an opportunity to make sure this is a good match, to make sure that this is going to work well for both of them. And interestingly enough, a lot of the high schools, especially with companies that we're working with now, we still get high schools that want to give the employer students, here's this one, he's not going to be able to graduate, let's at least get him a job and let him go ahead. But that's not what the employers are looking for, because they're paying them even while they're in school. So what we're doing is working very closely with both employers and schools, and as I said, into community college in addition to high schools and universities to bridge that gap and make that connection, and enabling that student to really look at the classes that they're taking and what they're doing on the job. And the employer's telling us it really promotes them to problem solving, to really get into their job and to look at, asking questions and being more involved, because they're being able to apply what they're learning in the classroom to what they're doing on the job. And as far as the technology needs, an apprenticeship program is a living document. And we work very closely with the employer, as I said, so as the needs change, so does the training plan. So as technology changes, as equipment changes, so does the training plan. So the needs of the employer change with it, and we work with that to make sure there's a plan in place so that the needs are met, the employer is growing, the employer is competing more globally than ever before because they have an employer base that's growing with them.
Thanks. Let's stick with this needs of industry and the things that are changing. And in a report in the North Carolina Commission on Workforce Development, preparing North Carolina's workforce and businesses for the global economy, it was reported that by 2020, North Carolina will have more than 470 job openings related to science, technology, engineering, and math. Yet, companies report difficulty filling those positions with qualified workers, even during high times of unemployment. Tim, tell us a little bit about what you think we need to be doing to address in light of this ongoing challenge. What are we missing here?
Okay, this is the part where you figure out why I'm an idiot. And I normally don't work with notes, but so many good things have been said here that I had to jot down a few things and build on those. That's the danger of going last or near last, is you change your entire script around because of what you've heard, or you're redundant with what you've heard. So I'll go the other direction. But I've heard several people talk about disengagement, engagement, and that kind of thing. So in terms of STEM, that entire ability to build an awareness of what's out there in that arena and to engage the students. And we've talked about the rural markets we have and the difficulties that presents and all. And I just want to throw this up. This is sort of an oxymoron or dichotomy in action here as I hold up the cover of Wired magazine instead of having it on the screen here. I don't know how many of you can actually see that, but that is a 12-year-old girl that grew up next to a garbage dump in the midst of one of the drug war flashpoint areas in Mexico. And she was part of the automaton development program, otherwise known as standard curriculum, until, for a pretty courageous teacher, colored outside the lines. And there's some very interesting study and sort of a radical difference in engagement here. And later that year, she achieved the top score in the country in their achievement test. And the entire class was approximately, where before 45% failed, I think something like 3 or 4% failed in 1 year because of that. So it makes for interesting reading. We'll disagree with a lot of it, but it's kind of an interesting, but that whole engagement aha is part of it. Another thing I want to build on is and again, I'm known as something of a contrarian. I met Tom Peters once, and he may say this all the time, but he said, I really only believe half of what I say. Your job is to figure out which half. And I sort of subscribe to that. So forgive me as I'm sort of the contrarian here a little bit in terms of the skill sets and training. My entire career, I've hired for passion and trained for skill. I've told candidates as recently as a couple weeks over here at Wolf Ridge, and I may be excommunicated from Centennial now, our offices are here, that I really don't care what you know. I don't read your resume very much anyway, and I read it differently than most folks because what you know is going to be obsolete in 5 years anyway. And what I'm interested in is, are you passionate? Are you curious? Do you have the ability to learn, to adapt, to be different? You know, Steve talked about change management. Those are the skills I'm looking for. And they aren't taught in what has heretofore been sort of standard curricula. And I've really been pleased with what I've heard here in terms of the direction that this admittedly enlightened small group of folks is pushing toward. But, you know, in my view, that's what we need. And much of what we do is going to be automated with artificial intelligence and decision support tools and all that anyway. So we're going to continually progress toward needing to fill the role of things that have to have organic involvement and we should be talking about 22nd century jobs. As I think Steve again said, you know, we're 14% of the way through 21st century. That ship has sailed for the most part in terms of the big changes we have to make and the time it takes to turn the Queen Mary around.
Mark, one of the things that always appeals to me about the teaching profession and teachers that I've met through our work is how passionate and curious they are. And that is the vehicle for delivering that same passion and curiosity to their students. It would be wonderful if master teachers like you, who've benefited from collaborating with people in industry and at universities and other experiences, were able to disseminate what you learned to other teachers in the schools. What do you think is the most effective way for going about and providing those types of disseminative, collaborative opportunities? And what obstacles are there that you face as educators in being able to do that?
Well, I do believe that we have a strong infrastructure already in place in North Carolina. Actually, when you look at programs such as this, the Grassroots, NCSMT, North Carolina Science Teacher Association, Bridging the Gap Conference, you have countless and several other in this room that I'm sorry if I did not name. But we have several opportunities that are provided to teachers to share their best practices around the state. Lots of opportunities. What the issue, though, is that teachers have to leave their classroom to improve their classroom, if you think about it. So what teachers need is time. One great idea that came about at the Institute for Emerging Issues Forum was to pay teachers on an 11-month scale instead of a 10-month. And that extra month should be spent collaborating, building unique partnerships, community partnerships. You know, and imagine how great education in North Carolina would be if our teachers weren't working 3 jobs. If they had that time in the summer to actually focus on where their ambition truly lies. People think teachers aren't ambitious. People believe teachers aren't ambitious, that they somehow stopped short of going to get the money somewhere else. I challenge anybody to find somebody more ambitious than me inside my classroom. And I think that's the key. We have to give them time to get to these great organizations, these great conferences, these great places to share their best practices.
Thank you. Kathryn, the Brookings Institution, in a very recent March 2014 report, highlighted the German dual educational model as a strategy for us to consider in the United States. You have a goal of increasing the number of apprenticeship programs in North Carolina over the next couple of years. What are your thoughts on the German model, and What industries do you think we need to be focusing on and targeting for these types of apprenticeships, and why?
Well, actually, in last July, I was fortunate to be able to go to Germany and actually visit some of their companies and see the apprenticeship model there, and it was really amazing, and I truly enjoyed that. I think as far as the German model, it's an excellent example, and we already have several companies here in North Carolina that are using that model and have been using it for several years. And you mentioned the Apprenticeship 2000 model. I think it should be used in almost every occupation. In Germany, it is used in every occupation. When we were there was even a tease, even the prostitutes have a union in some type of training. So, I don't know how appropriate that was, but the point is, but the point being is that, it's applicable in every sense of the word as far as occupation. So, for us in apprenticeship, we're looking at the economy, looking at the business needs, looking at North Carolina and seeing, what is there, what does the business need, and how do we go about bridging the skills gap and increasing the education, working more with our teachers. I agree wholeheartedly with what Mark is saying. There is a big disconnect. The teachers really don't know, what businesses in their community are there, what the businesses need, and how to apply that to the classroom. So I think that the German model is truly an excellent model, and here in North Carolina, we're even being a model for other states in America. We've been on several conference calls with Apprenticeship 2000 and other companies, and advising other states on how to actually do apprenticeship and implement apprenticeship in your area. So we're looking at definitely advanced manufacturing right now, healthcare, other areas, and just as the economy changes, we change with it. So those are areas that we're looking into right now.
Thank you. I wanted to engage you all in this conversation and invite some questions from the audience as well to share with our panelists here. Sure.
How do we make our culture, how do we create an apprenticeship culture where it's not unique, it's not for that targeted group, but it is, as you said, Kathryn, it is universal. How do we create that apprenticeship culture for our citizenry versus the way?
Well, I think we first need to start with our schools like we are, and parents. Parents have a big misconception of advanced manufacturing is a good example. And I think we need to work with the school system in both the high school, the community colleges, and the university system because it's applicable in all senses of the word. And work with them and work down into the home, the parents.
I think there's a large disconnect, too, between the standards and what we're trying to do here with the grassroots, community-based approach. It's impossible to be community-based, but also expect a national standard. You can't do it. And I agree with that completely. I think that it has to start with teachers reaching out to the community and the community reaching out to the schools. It has to start there. You have to build a model locally first. That's how I teach. I teach local issues in Holly Springs to let them see the global picture. You start with the model with that community, and every community is going to be different. And then you have what they mentioned earlier in the first panel, you have the regional meetings. You have the opportunity for these community models to gather and share their best practices, and you pick and choose what works for you, what doesn't work. Free us up, and you will be amazed at how higher our standards are.
And I think from an industry standpoint, we have to get past the idea of when we're recruiting that we're going to go look for that unicorn with 10 years of experience in exactly what we do and stop working for the Wall Street analysts in the next quarter as we're trying to get better at our work and increase what we do, and realize this is asparagus, and we're planting asparagus, and it'll be 3 years before you get a crop you can eat. But when you're done, you're going to have much better asparagus than what you buy at the grocery store.
And if I may add to that, the studies show that if a student of any age is able to apply work or reality to what they're doing in the classroom, will far excel than otherwise. And I think here we're very fortunate in North Carolina that we do have a lot of companies that are interested in an apprenticeship. And I think I've mentioned this before. I think we're better than the German model because we can have the American twist, if you will. We can enhance it. We have the freedom and the capabilities to make it even bigger than the German model myself.
Thank you. Other questions? Steve?
A little twist, but I think this is probably the best forum to ask today. We've done a lot of this grassroots work, and we find that at the end of it all is that really getting into the right college is the end game for a lot of these kids. And if we ask them to do a lot of entrepreneurial type activities, if we get them involved in the STEM process, which we're called STEM-E, so we believe in it. But the engineering process is about failure. It's about learning from your failures and what you do. It's also about going out and getting the experience that you're talking about. But in many of these cases, that takes the kid out of an AP course or takes them out of a more of a traditional course where their GPA may have been better, but you couldn't buy the experience, which is what's really credible when they try to get the job. But what we're running into is that a more traditional admissions system is the end game that we're sometimes now we're getting good enough at the grassroots effort that the admission systems now is still looking at things as rigor of course and standardized tests. It's kind of that's the biggest percentages that they're looking at. Has there been any work with admissions to start looking at this kid has taken on an entrepreneurial, endeavor, or they work with a company? I mean, like you said earlier, is to get rid of that stigma that that's not as powerful as a course that really is, been around 100 years. I guess my question is there been any inclusion in admissions and clearing that up? Because now, we're doing a lot of grassroots like you talked about, but at the end of the day, are we getting our kids in those programs because they are doing these new things? And has anybody looked at that or talked with these guys?
I think that has a lot to do with the vertical alignment. I do a lesson plan with my students where they build these 1/16 scale passive solar homes, and I'll get to your question and answer, I promise. But and from there, we choose a winner, winning design for the year, and that goes to our drafting class, who that drafting class actually draws it in AutoCAD, scales it to a quarter scale, and then it goes to our construction level 3 students, and they build it to North Carolina code at quarter scale. And then our interior design class decorates that house using eco-friendly materials and things like that. And to get to your point, that vertical alignment, I'm trying to continue on into the university setting. So I'm working with North Carolina State professors, UNC Charlotte, the solar decathlon entries that they and Appalachian State have done. And I'm trying to provide internships and ways in to the university setting. Unfortunately, teaching in a college level course or a college preparation course, I haven't seen the admission standards change to where there is a little bit more leeway for that yet. But I think if we can continue to focus on vertically aligning and giving students these opportunities, these really rare, unique, community-based opportunities, then it sure does make them a more interesting candidate to that university. So I think that is the key, is to align through, not just, you have elementary schools and then you have middle schools, high schools, and college. We have to have K through 16 is how we have to approach this. Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Kathryn, did you want to talk about that aspect of getting admissions, from the context of in the employment arena and getting engaged with companies, what they're looking for?
Well, I think the most important thing is to really have a good communication with your employers and finding out exactly what their needs are. And if we can do that, I think that will enhance everything from the bottom up. And that way we can go back and look at different models and how we're doing things.
Great, thank you. Donnie, I wanted to also be mindful of our friends online if there are any questions that are coming in. I see one right here as well from Sam. I'm sorry, someone actually has a microphone. My apologies. We'll be right back, Sam.
Marie from NC First Robotics. And the idea of connecting industry to the classroom, I see two challenges that we've come across the state. The first challenge is from the school side, convincing the schools to allow the industry mentors in the building and giving them time and access to work with the students, not on one-off career fair days, but for longer, deeper mentoring as defined by the US 2020 initiatives. The second problem that we see is industry and businesses being willing to enable their employees the time to go to the students during the school day, which is also during the business day. And how do we bridge that gap between the school needs and the industry needs so that they can meet in the middle to do the best for our students?
Tim, would you like to?
There's an interesting one.
You just lead off and then you can tag on to it. I think it's going to be a two-way street here because we are hearing a lot more from employers as far as the investment potential, but the return on investment is going to far outweigh their investment in the beginning. So I think a lot of it's going to be a two-way street. We've got a lot of companies that have gone to schools inviting teachers and students to come and just take a walk through and come and see what it actually looks like. And it's not what it used to be. It's far changed since then. So I think it's going to take a lot of communication on probably a local level, a two-way street, and working out those logistics there.
Yeah, this is sort of like how many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb? Just one, but it has to really want to change. So you have to reach to employers who can make the connection and understand the value proposition and that it's not measurable immediately or even ever, perhaps. There are, in every trade association I'm in, there are education committees and outreach committees and that type of thing. So there's an avenue to get to industry people who are in a teachable moment, in a reachable moment to do those kinds of things, and perhaps that's an avenue to start. And we're sort of lemmings in a lot of ways. So once successful businesses and people start doing this, other people will notice and jump on the bandwagon, I think. But it takes early adopters and change agents to do that, and you might find them in those kinds of places, perhaps.
We're very lucky in Holly Springs to be a small town, so we have access to a whole lot of people that want to help. And I love our First Robotics team. I'm a co-advisor for that team, and they amaze me every day with what they do. But I do think that your rural areas, your smaller communities, that typically that may be the only school, high school, middle school, it could be the only one in the area. So I don't think it's difficult for small communities to find those resources. The key is to allow the schools to utilize them. So we had a global corporation in Holly Springs that offered us a lot of money to start a biotech curriculum. But we were not allowed to do that because we're not designated a magnet school that would allow us to take advantage of that. So I think you have to free the communities and you have to free the schools to be able to provide that interaction. But we are very lucky as a small town to have that great community. And we're the only high school, so it's even better. We don't have to share space.
So enhanced empowerment is what I'm hearing of communities is going to be critical to enabling that progress. Sam and then Donnie.
This is real quick, and it's not a question. It's possibly a point of reassurance. As part of the STEM Learning Network, you may recall I mentioned that we were to devise a plan by which STEM schools could be designated and identified. We spent about 3 years working on that process, and the first schools are going through that evaluation right now. The point of reassurance is that everything you've been talking about at the other panel, and it's my guess the next, are components that are characteristics of STEM-driven schools. The reason we had to define that is that it was kind of like Rip Van Winkle. I went to sleep one day and woke up the next, and everyone was calling themselves STEM with no real defined role or responsibility for what happened in the school and what kids were expected to demonstrate through performances that they could do. Entrepreneurial issues, creativity, dropping by school rather than attending is a characteristic of a real high school STEM environment. The kids ought to be out on the street doing things. I know about Tim. If we had a Kenan fellow in every classroom, we wouldn't have any problems. But that's a very expensive, I know you Kenan people don't want to hear that, but I'm chair of that board, so I can say it. It's an expensive endeavor, but it's the way we ought to be training teachers. And so to the audience out there, we're moving in the right direction, and everything I'm hearing today is a reassurance that not just educators understand that.
And we like to think that all expenditures are investments in our teachers and in our communities. And it's going to take resources to do this work, folks. Donnie, we're going to be closing up in just a couple, but I want to check with you and see if there's anyone online that had any questions.
We do. One question that came in. Testing is driving the culture of the classroom with results that don't support college preparedness. How can we move the culture of education so that the professionals in the classroom are responsible for assessing student learning in a way that pushes our students to demonstrate innovation and critical thinking?
Boy, if I knew that answer. I think that you limit the standardized tests. You allow the teachers. I think if you followed more of the College Board AP model where the teacher creates the curriculum and they send that curriculum in to be approved, and then they're still tested. There's still that standardized test with the advanced placement exam. But the beauty of that exam is that a student cannot fail it. So, and teachers' jobs are still connected to it in a sense, because how my students do kind of determines whether or not I get to continue to teach that course. But there's accountability, but you're not tying test anxiety and stress and all that stuff for that child into that one exam, because really the only thing that can happen to them if they take that AP exam is they can get college credit, possibly. So I really like that approach. I teach Earth Science, which is a Common Core North Carolina final exam, very structured curriculum. And then I teach AP Environmental, which is a curriculum that I developed. And if you want to see the difference between one that is confined, where we have to teach certain things by this time or else, and another course where I am free to collaborate and work with people around the nation, I think it's a wonderful model. And I think that's the approach. That's where we should kind of lean towards.
We have time for a quick comment on the innovation and creativity aspect. I've often said I'm surprised engineers don't lean to the left when they walk, because the left brain is probably all big and swollen and the right side has atrophied to nothing. And this isn't really at high school level. The creativity comes from seeing things differently, from connecting dots that aren't on the paper to coloring outside the lines. A lot of those kinds of characteristics come from connecting the hemispheres. A lot of that happens early. I mean, it's pre-K and maybe K to 5 and stuff. And it worries me that when we talk about STEM and creativity innovation, we talk a lot about AP classes and advanced technical things, and yet we're diminishing the role, and as an engineer, it's a strange thing to say, diminishing the role of the arts and humanities and the things that develop the right side of the brain. I think that's at our creative peril down the road. And I'd be careful about how we focus and how we manage all of that and provide a good foundation in the math and sciences, but also provide a way that's going to foster creativity down the road.
Sure.
That question was related to an earlier question that I did tell Dr. Corbin and Charlotte that I get back to. He wanted to discuss the role museums might play with respect to training teachers to inspire students. And I'll give that question to you, Stephen.
Well, one of the ways museums can do this, and they have a variety of ways to do it, is to work on the aspiration. So often when we are engaging teachers and engaging students, we think about this as a cognitive issue. And cognitive skills will change with regard to the needs that we find in the workplace. But what will be transferable are other things, such as the 21st century skills of critical thinking, working in groups, good questioning, but also the ability to engender a sense of creativity and a sense of aspiration. We don't work the affective. We don't work the intrinsic motivation issues that really can drive learners, families, schools to really see this in a new way. So I think that we have to look at those three areas more comprehensively. When we can work that intrinsic motivation, when we work the affective, when we resource that, when we inspire wonder, I think then what we'll see is that individual learners can be self-driven, can be self-directed, can be self-motivated to drive themselves through this thing we call the STEM pipeline, rather than thinking of it as an institutional problem by way of curriculum, by way of standards and evaluation.
Thank you, Steve. It's time for us to close this session. And I want to thank the panel members for their thoughtful engagement and ideas, and I'd like to thank the audience for being engaged and interested in your consideration of this discussion here. We have an opportunity to inspire our students across the state and to transform those inspirational moments into aspirational moments for them. And I hope this discussion is one that helps frame a really important conversation that we can continue to build upon. And what I want to do is leave the last word here to our teacher. I saw Mark had something that he wanted to say, but I think it's important that we give you, as the teacher here in the room, the last word.
Well, I was just going to, standardized tests, when you're looking at that from the previous question, if you allow a teacher to use true formative assessments throughout the school year, true formative assessments where, for example, if I'm teaching about earthquakes to my freshman earth science academic class, they have 10 stations and they're learning about all of these different aspects of earthquakes. And instead of giving them a grade, on a piece of paper, they answer the questions and then they decide on a scale of 1 to 4, how hard was this? And then they put that in a box. It's totally anonymous. It's a true formative assessment, because then I look at that and it allows me to refine my teaching, to see what do I need to reteach, what do I need to focus on next. There's no stress or test anxiety when those students do those formative assessments, and I can really dive deeper into what they need to learn. So I think you go through the year, you take formative assessments, you have a single standardized test, a 1 at best, and I think that you will see an opportunity for students to really show you what they can do.
Thank you. Please join me in thanking everyone here on this panel. And thank you for your time today.
Okay, so you had some time to discuss, and I get to play school teacher now, and I'll be coming around to a couple of tables to see if we can get some insight into some of the things you guys have been discussing. So I'm going to pick on this table right here, and who would like to give a little bit of highlight of what you guys were talking about?
I have teenagers, so this hits home for me. I have 3. But I guess our highlight was basically how do you get companies involved, and how do you make it simple as far as go out and interact with the companies, find out what their projections are and what they need, and get that back into the curriculum. And to some degree, based on some of the conversation we had earlier, which is how do we get the universities in line with that as well? There's still a lot of traditionalism there that doesn't change, and that's the end game. I mean, as a parent, that's where I'm trying to get my child, and as an educator, that's where I'm trying to get my children or my students. So how do we make sure that the work that we're doing at the grassroots level moves all the way through with them? How do we put our hands or our money and our activities where our mouth is?
I'm going to pick on this table here next. And part of the theme for today is also immediacy. And we'll get more to that this afternoon when we go into our regional sessions. But it's about what we can do now, today, to get some things moving, as opposed to, we spend a lot of time at events talking about logistics and people and resources and timetables. But what can we do now? And how can we not make the perfect enemy of the good? So that's kind of where the focus will be also this afternoon. And we'll talk more about that later. But it's just a few comments about what you guys discussed just now about that connection.
We were talking about different ways to maybe bridge. We were talking about ways to possibly bridge schools so that if we were referring to Mark's situation with the biotechnology opportunity, and perhaps there are ways to get schools to work together so that you could offer that at one school and still have students from other schools benefit from it being there. Spent a lot of time on that, actually.
Now I'm going to go over here, one last table over here to Barrington's table to see what they talked about.
Well, we realized through talking at this table that we all have the same objective and are doing things that are very similar. Getting into the classroom logistically is one issue that we're all facing, and we're finding creative ways to do it via the internet or through introducing research or other STEM careers. And I think what was interesting about our table is to make sure that we're connected, that there's no redundancies, and that at our level of the people in this room that we're creating partnerships to introduce a kind of a front to make sure that we're learning from one another in all of our efforts.
Thank you all for your comments.